Hi, Shashat Media. I'm Cherien Dabis, the writer, director, and one of the actors in All That's Left of You.
So, Cherien, my first question is, films like yours are important to watch, always have been and will be. They showed a hidden part of what so many don't know properly about. And what's so special about your film is that it goes beyond a simple narrative to tell a story, a complex one about a family throughout 3 generations. What helped you keep it grounded in human experience rather than just historical?
Well, from the beginning, I really wanted to tell the story of a family and how people are impacted by political and historic events. As a Palestinian American who, was raised in the U.S. and surrounded by people who didn't know anything about Palestine, and also surrounded by news headlines that really dehumanized us, and we were just kind of nothing but nameless, faceless, headlines and numbers. I really wanted to tell a story that was deeply emotional, that was really about the emotional experience of people who have had to endure so much for so many decades. I felt that was really the story that was missing, like really the story of how people are changed by how our identities are formed around what's happening in Palestine. And that was something that I witnessed within my own family. So in some ways, it was just my perspective. It was very easy for me to focus on the people because that's really my experience of being Palestinian is like witnessing how my own family was impacted by devastating events over time and seeing identities, like my dad's identity shift over time as he watched the continuing devastation and deterioration of his homeland.
Mm. The film was later joined by executive producers Mark Ruffalo and Javier Bardem. How their involvement and other Hollywood stars, brought about support for the film?
Well, first of all, it's amazing having them on board, and they've really helped to raise the profile of the film. And that was really, what we wanted. They, just through social media, through press coverage, through their involvement, we've really been able to kind of bolster the public profile of the film and just make people more aware of it. And I think with the story like this, it's really important because, in the West, Palestinian stories are being rejected, are being silenced, are being censored. Major distributors and streamers are not picking up our films. It's harder and harder for audiences to see them, to know about them. And so having celebrity involvement, support, and having celebrities use their platforms to really draw attention to the films has been really essential in kind of raising awareness and getting people out to the cinemas and making sure that people know about the film. It's also been actually really helpful in like even just booking the theaters, even just in something as simple as that, it's not, when you don't have a major distributor or streamer, sometimes it's a little hard to even get the theaters to accept, programming the film. So it's been super helpful in that regard as well.
What's beautiful about the film, what's more beautiful is the title. I find the title, All That's Left of You, incredibly beautiful. One of the most striking titles I've ever, came across. It suggests absence as much as presence, that something has been taken or left behind. Can you talk about what's left means to you in the context of the film?
Well, I love your interpretation of it, actually. That's really beautiful. I've not heard it said quite like that it communicates both presence and absence, which is so right on. That actually really touches me to hear that. Yeah, I wanted a title that had, multiple meanings. All That's Left of You within the context of the film could be, what's left of the family, what's left of Palestine, what's left of Jaffa. There's so many meanings to this kind of poetic sounding title. For me, what's left of us at the end of the day is love. And that's really all that's left of you. That's really what the film is about in many ways. The end of the movie, the final shot is our main couple standing, by the sea in Palestine. Like, they've been able to return to their homeland, but it's somewhat unrecognizable to them. So it's this, really kind of melancholic moment but also like a moment of peace, because despite everything they've survived, they still have each other. And it is through their love that they've been able to survive and endure everything that we've seen them endure throughout the film. And I really wanted to end the movie on this note, on this moment of love, this moment where you just see this couple. And, at the end of the day, despite all the chaos, the best we can do sometimes is just find a moment of peace in our own hearts. And it can just be a fleeting moment. And as this couple is standing by the sea, it's like they just have this moment of peace. And it's really beautiful. And I think it gives a sense of hope, that like love is how we survive. And I wanted to leave people with that, with something, the movie is it can be heavy, but it has a lot of love and tenderness and even a little humor and hope. And that's what the note that I wanted to leave people on.
Well done. Thank you. Thank you so much for this. My other question, I know that you were initially preparing to shoot the film in the West Bank. And then, of course, the war in Gaza started. The film ended up being shot across multiple countries, mainly Jordan. I wanted to ask you about, the difficulties of that process, because the film carries such a strong sense of place. It really feels rooted in Palestine. That kind of authenticity comes obviously from your hard work and from a clear vision, artistic one, to one in the film to feel true to these times and those places. So how did you came to achieve that, Cherien?
Well, I really appreciate you saying that. It's amazing that so many people really think the film was shot in Palestine when, unfortunately, though we were supposed to shoot the, 90% of the film in Palestine, we ended up shooting a tiny percentage of the film in Palestine because we had to evacuate after October the 7th. And, we were planning to shoot all over Palestine, not just the West Bank. We were going to shoot in Jericho, Ramallah, Nablus, Haifa, Jaffa. Like, we were really planning to be all over. And we prepped in Palestine for about 5 months. I worked with a big Palestinian crew on the ground there. We did all of the work. We found our locations, we cast the film. We had a gorgeous warehouse full of props and set dressing, things that we crafted and props that we found, historic props, from all of the different time periods. And, we ended up having to leave all of that work behind, when we evacuated. We had to leave our Palestinian crew behind, which was devastating. And we ended up going to Cyprus, where we had always planned to shoot a small percentage of the film. We shot that 10% in Cyprus, and then we went to Jordan, where we shot most of the film. But, we had hoped to return to Palestine. It just became clear at some point that things were escalating and that we were not going to be able to return. So in some ways, the movie lived what any Palestinian lives, which is, exile and waiting to return. We found ourselves looking for Palestine everywhere but Palestine. We shot in Jordan, Cyprus, and Greece. Finally, the last part of the movie is all shot in Greece. And then we did do some remote shooting in Palestine. So there are certain shots from Jaffa that are actually, we did shoot those in Palestine, and I directed via FaceTime, which was challenging, but, we made it work. I think the biggest challenges on this film were that we had to start from scratch. We literally had to start pre-production all over again. We had to find all of our locations all over again. We had to recast many of the parts. I had to work with 4 different crews in 4 different countries, 3 different assistant directors, 2 different cinematographers. This is very unusual. You usually communicate once to your entire crew.
Yeah.
You shoot the film. To have to work with so many different crews, in a state of crisis, really, because we were in a logistical crisis, a financial crisis. We had to raise a lot more money after we fled Palestine because everything we spent there was gone. We had to start from scratch and do all of that work all over again. So it was a very challenging, very, very challenging and draining way to make a film. And I would say it was physically and tremendously emotionally draining. Because we found ourselves making a movie about what was happening as it was happening. We're making a movie about the Nakba as we're watching a bigger Nakba, an unprecedented Nakba that turns into a genocide taking place before our very eyes. It was like life and art merged. And suddenly, we found ourselves shooting scenes that looked a lot like the footage that we were watching come out of Gaza. So it was just very, very emotionally draining. But also it was just a huge gift to be able to create at a time of such destruction, to be able to tell this particular story at this moment in time, because the film became so much more relevant and so vital. And in a way, the movie became a container for all of us, for our love, for our grief, for our compassion. We threw ourselves into it. And for that, I think we were all very grateful just to have that. The movie, I think, has more emotional resonance and more depth because of everything that we experienced and everything that we were witnessing as we were making it.
My last question will be, Palestinian films are gaining recognition this year. 3 were even nominated for the, shortlisted for the Oscars, which is incredible. Yet Palestinian narratives often face barriers, being, labeled as non-English or, non-important. From your experience making all that's left of you, did you face something similar because it's a Palestinian movie?
I did. I think I did, in certain places. Funny enough, when I started raising money, like raising financing to make this film back in 2021, 2022, people were very, very responsive to the script. They found it very emotional. People would tell me that they were crying by the end of the story. And it was really beautiful. I had a lot of support in the script, and really it felt like people were very open to the story and like they were ready, like almost felt like the world was ready for the story finally, like really ready for like a Nakba film, which was amazing. And then I would say after the events of October 2023, the world shifted. People became afraid. And, from a distribution standpoint, major distributors and streamers in some ways have always been afraid of the Palestinian narrative. And so that wasn't really unusual. But I would say even funders became afraid. Thankfully, my funders remained steadfast. No one pulled out of the film. In fact, a lot of people wanted to support even more, which was amazing. But I would say on the distribution side, definitely I experienced hesitation and fear. I had major distributors say to me, we're afraid of the subject matter, and streamers as well. And that was incredibly disheartening, but in a way, it's not surprising. Look, and when I say this, I'm talking more about in the US. I'm talking about Hollywood, like major Hollywood distributors and streamers. The film sold very well all over the world. I have fantastic distributors. I partnered with Watermelon Pictures in the US, and they're doing a fantastic job. They've been doing a fantastic job releasing Palestinian films and lots of other films. But it was definitely a challenge with, I would say, major distributors and streamers when the film first premiered in the US. And that was very disheartening, but it's also not a surprise because Palestinians, like not a single Palestinian film has ever gotten major distribution. So I wasn't necessarily surprised, but it was still very disheartening to face that and to hear what distributors were saying. Even though they were professing their love for the film, they were too afraid to actually, pick the movie up.